Good afternoon and a very warm welcome everyone to our webinar, Insights to the Commercialization of Diagnostics. I'm Marie-Claire Henry. I'm a Senior Market Advisor for Enterprise Ireland, leading on the healthcare and life science sectors here in the UK. Enterprise Ireland is the trade and innovation arm of the Irish government and recently recognised by PitchBook as the most active venture capital fund globally. We work in partnership with over 4,000 Irish companies whom we help to start, grow, innovate and win export sales in global markets, including in the UK, which remains Ireland's largest export market. One of the key elements of our role as market advisors is to provide insights into market dynamics and tools which will support the growth of Irish businesses, whether that's helping you enter a new market for the first time or accelerating scale. So we have a very full agenda, and so some quick housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you. If you have any questions, enter them into the chat. Time permitting, we will try and cover them today, and if not, we'll follow up soon after. I would like to invite our first guest to join me. Jared, I might ask you to turn your camera on, and Peter, if we can perhaps go to the next slide, please. While Jared's doing that, just a quick big thank you to the team at Roche, some of whom you will hear from today. Thank you for your time, your commitment and collaboration over the last few months, working with us to design this webinar. I think everyone will agree that this really is a unique opportunity to hear firsthand from such a high caliber panel of experts. Welcome to my co-chair for today, Jared Harkin. Jared is the Head of Innovation for Roche Diagnostics UK and Ireland. In addition to holding an MBA and a degree in electronic engineering, Jared has almost 30 years experience in innovation, both in consulting and also industry roles. He has worked across a dozen industries and organizations of all sizes to set up and manage innovation programs, foster a culture of innovation and deliver growth. And I'm not sure where he found the time in the midst of all of that, but he's also written the ebook, Innovation Unplugged. Originally from Dublin, Jared now lives in Brighton. He sits on the advisory board for Brighton Business School. Now, before I go on, I just wanted to say that no Irish webinar is complete without a little bit of a story. As many of you know, the Irish diaspora around the globe bring us a lot of value as an organisation and also to the Irish exporters that we work with. You'd also be aware that there's a huge number of Irish living and working here in the UK or with family over here, which only adds to further strengthen the links between the two regions. Now, I'd already identified Jared as someone I wanted to speak to as a leader in the sector. And then when I spotted his post on Twitter, Up the Dubs, which in fact turned out to be a reference to his highly talented niece, being a member of the winning All-Ireland football team this year, my careful skills of investigation, I thought he has to be Irish, and hopefully that's going to make me connecting with him just that little bit easier or a little bit warmer. And so, Jared, here we are now. I'm absolutely delighted to have you and the team here. And before I pass over to the agenda, if I could perhaps maybe ask you to quickly introduce Roche to us today. Thanks, Jared.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Marie-Claire. And you know what, it's been such great fun working with you to create this event. And thanks also to Enterprise Ireland for inviting us to be here. For your members joining today, this event is really, it's all about you. You know, we want you to be successful. And we hope to leave you with some new ways of thinking about commercialization. And Roche is the world's largest biotech company and the world leader in vitro diagnostics. We're also the biggest healthcare investor in R&D. And founded in 1896, so 125 years ago, we continue to innovate for better ways to prevent, diagnose and treat diseases to create the best outcomes for patients. And it's something I'm very, very proud of. And in the UK and Ireland, Roche Diagnostics employs about 650 staff. So back over to you, Marie-Claire.
Thank you so much, Jared. And we look forward to hearing from you later on when you chair the panel session. Now, our next speakers will explore how Ceresep, an Irish SME led by CEO and founder Dermot Scanlon, went from identifying an unmet need to building a market and a successful business. We'll hear Dermot's story and his advice for Irish businesses trying to access the UK and the NHS. We'll then hear a series of video presentations covering support services for startups, health economics, market access, value proposition, and partnering. The presentations will be followed by a panel Q&A, and we plan to finish up around 3:30. So I'd now like to invite Len and Dermot to join me if you'd like to turn your cameras on. And while you're doing that, I'll perhaps introduce Elen Marshall. After completing his degree in biochemistry at NUI Galway, Len then graduated from the University of Cork with a PhD from the microbiology department before starting his career at Roche. He's an experienced leader of commercial and development teams across the molecular and tissue pathology businesses, and he now leads the healthcare development team at Roche Ireland, where the focus is very much on shaping healthcare through innovation and partnership with the healthcare systems in Ireland and across Europe. You're very welcome, Dermot and Len. So I'm now going to turn my camera off, and when you see me again, that's your cue that you have about 2 to 3 minutes left to wrap up, please. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Mary Claire, and to Ger for a very nice, warm welcome. I'm delighted to be here today and to be joined by Dermot Scanlon, who is the founder and CEO of Ceresep Limited. Dermot, you're very welcome. And
thank you, Len. Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me today.
Could I start by asking you to tell us a little bit about Ceresep, your business that you started all those years ago, and where it is today?
Yeah, in 1995, I was working for a medical device manufacturing company here in Limerick called Amicon. They were based in Raheen Industrial Estate, not too far away from where I am now. And they actually found themselves in the peculiar position that they lost their FDA license, and the division that I worked in had to basically close down, and it was moved to Holland. We were purchased by an American company called Mintec, and I moved to Maastricht to work there in the headquarters. And my wife and I and our young child at the time, we made the bold move. And I was actually the only person in the company that moved. And during the course of my work in Mintec, I was dealing with distributors. And we had a Belgian distributor that I established a good relationship with. And in 1997, I had made the decision that I would return back to Ireland again with my wife and child, because my wife wanted to bring up our child in Ireland at that time. So the distributor said to me one day, he said to me, Dermot, would you consider being the distributor in Ireland for our veterinary diagnostic products? And I suppose I set up the business in March 1997. And here we are today. Ceresep was going out of that, and we started by selling veterinary diagnostic products to basically the state veterinary laboratories. And then after that, we actually moved to sell our products quickly into the clinical diagnostic market. So it all happened pretty fast. Today, Ceresep employs 85 people. We sell to 35 countries and 5 continents. We are basically, our main product that we have developed is a product called Enteric Bio. And Enteric Bio is a kit for diagnosing of gastroenteritis diseases. And this product was the flagship product of Ceresep, and has been the flagship product for Ceresep for the last few years. And we set up a business in the UK in July 2012, and there, out of that, we have grown the business to a turnover at the moment of about 10 million sterling, just turning this June 2021. So the business has grown pretty well. We're very pleased with it, and the UK has been a tremendous success for us.
And that's exactly what we're going to try and focus on through the remainder of our discussion this afternoon. And it's a very interesting story, because as you described it, you started out in distribution. But where along the way did you develop this concept to move your business from being a distributor into innovation, research and development, building and identifying a niche market area, and then actually commercializing a solution that you've developed yourself? How did your business model change into that, and how did it build from that?
Yeah, I suppose one of the advantages we had, unlike a startup, we had got a bit of experience selling diagnostic products, and we were trading and selling a range of different products. So we got to know I suppose microbiologists became the area we started to gravitate towards, microbiologists working inside in clinical laboratories. And then we started to find out what their needs were, and I guess things that the unmet needs. So the first thing we kind of identified was that around 2003, we started to identify that there was an unmet need. And this was basically for a test for gastroenteritis, and the existing technology that existed for diagnosing gastroenteritis was basically a culture-based test method. It took minimum 24 hours to tell you if the patient was negative, and it took 48 hours at least to tell you it was positive, and it could actually take you up to 5 days to really say if the patient was positive, depending on what they had. So the kind of thing that we were looking at is we were looking at getting one test that could replace lots of other tests. So traditionally they would use something like 4 petri dishes to do a screen of bacteria, and we changed all that by developing Interic Bio. It was basically one sample, and we were able to take a swab of that sample, and we were able to do a PCR test on it using a platform technology that had robotic processing that would automate the process, and you could get the results within 3 hours. So that's what we set about doing, and I suppose we did achieve that.
So in that space of time, you saw the unmet need, you identified it, you spoke to your customer base, and you saw the opportunity. But of course, you also had to look at the resources you had in place at the time to try and build a solution around that. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you identified what type of, I guess, skill sets and competencies you need to bring into Cereset, but also as well, what type of capital and investment that you sought out to try and take this to the next level.
Yeah, I suppose I'd probably give you a small brief history how we done it, and that'll kind of encapsulate how it all worked out. As I said, it started, just nuts and bolts of it started in 2004. We actually did a project with Enterprise Ireland, the Research Technology Innovation Grant. We got a grant for that to develop the assay, and we worked with a student from University of Limerick to kick it all off. And this was basically a 4-year project, I think, and we ended up launching out of this a product in 2009. So our first generation product was in 2009, and this was based on a strip-based assay that was a reverse hybridization PCR on a strip, like a line assay. And while the assay worked very well, it was very robust, reliable, gave good results, we could see that it wasn't perfect. First of all, it was still taking 24 hours. There was an incubation step, and we got rid of that incubation step then, and we made a very brave move. In 2010, we actually went back to the drawing boards, and you know what we said? We'd redesign the assay completely from start to finish, and we actually we then teamed up with the likes of Roche Diagnostics because we needed equipment. They had the Roche Light Cycler 480 at the time, and it was a super instrument. We couldn't go and develop something like this. It would have cost us a fortune. So what we did was clever at the time. We came knocking on your door. He offered us the equipment, and we were able to use that. So that was one of the key pieces of equipment we needed to carry out this test. And the second thing is we went to people like Eppendorf, and we got a pretty reasonably priced robot. We branded it in our own name, called Interic Bio Workstation, and we put that together to form the product that we have today. So we probably did it on a low budget relative to whatever a big company would have done. So I suppose first thing was we had some relationships, and we found partners to develop the technology with us. The second thing that we done is we went to places like Cork University Hospital in Limerick, and we'd identified. We'd kind of gone around the market first, and we went to all the main hospitals like Galway, Limerick, Cork, Waterford, St. Vincent's, Dublin, Beaumont and St. James's, and we found that there was a need for the market. So that gave us great confidence. And I suppose I might take it a step back. Our first generation assay, we started to sell this to Cork University Hospital, and that was thanks to people like Bridget Lucy, who was a medical scientist at the time. She's now the head of the biological science department in Cork Institute of Technology, and James O'Leary, who's a microbiologist at the time working there, and we ended up actually hiring James subsequently after that. But we first of all, we got our first site, and we actually we got revenue, we got profits out of that, and that then took us to the next stage. We reinvested all our monies that we got back into the business. We had Enterprise Ireland to help us. They were unbelievable. And then we had the partnership things with companies like yourself. And I think that really smoothened the way for us. And then we started to roll it out in Ireland first. And we went to we said we always wanted to be successful in Ireland first before we'd move outside of Ireland. So we went from site to site doing trials and stuff like that. And we got our first site, then our second site came, third site, that kind of thing. And it developed and mushroomed.
So at what point then did you make the decision to move into the UK market space, and what considerations did you have to think about when you were going to penetrate a market up until now that you had no footprint in regarding diagnostics?
Yeah, in the beginning, I used to go over to the UK, and I was investigating the market, and I used to travel around to some of the labs, and I was getting to know people all right, but I realized that we needed somebody really on the ground over there. So I did a lot of thinking, who could we hire, who could we get? And I kind of was very fortunate that I worked with a guy called Alan Winter, and he had previously worked in Trek Diagnostics in the UK, and Trek Diagnostics was supplying us with products. And Alan was a fantastic guy, really nice guy, very, very good. Now, he didn't have a huge knowledge of the UK market. He was more dealing in an export capacity, and he really wouldn't have known the UK market. But I just knew he was a very reliable guy with a lot of experience in software and applications. So I asked him to join us, and he joined us. But I suppose just before we set up the UK office was July, if I remember, July 2012. We had a stroke of good luck and good fortune. To carry out this process where we had moved from a strip-based assay into real-time assay, we hired a guy called David Clancy. And David Clancy had been working in Waterford University Hospital at the time. And David was a molecular scientist and a microbiologist. And basically, he knew a chief medical scientist in the Royal Free Hospital, and we got a big breakthrough just before we set up the office. We actually got our first placement in the UK with our strip-based assay. We still had version 1 at this stage, and I think that was probably the second or third site we actually got. So that gave us a huge confidence then to hire a person. Don't get me wrong, times we were a small company, and it was tough to make this decision to hire and to set up somebody in the UK, but it started like that then. And again, we did the same in the UK. We went to other sites, and we got a second, a third site, and things moved on nicely after that.
It's a fascinating story, and the speed at which you were able to translate as well. And you see Mary Claire's coming on the screen to give us the shepherd's crook there now, so we'll be wrapping it up
Give a couple of minutes.
In a minute. But I think we can bring this into the panel discussion later on. But I think it's fair to say that maybe in terms of the challenges that are there now, maybe being a little bit different back in your time. And this one final question would be in terms of regulatory, not so much say in Ireland, but looking at the UK market back then. What was your approach to managing the 𝐂𝐸𝐬𝐬𝐸𝐸 requirements, and particularly how to navigate the commissioning pathways that exist in the NHS?
I remember at the time it was said to us that we should possibly look at getting our product evaluated and going through a proper nice evaluation. But we kind of took a different approach, Lynn. We said that we would have to go from site to site, which we had to do in Ireland, and we had to do in Northern Ireland previous to that. And we said we would basically go from site to site, and we didn't bother with doing these regulations or the trials and stuff like that. And we found out that some companies that had done that in the past, they didn't get a whole lot of value out of it at the time. It may since have changed, but all we did is we went from site to site, and there was usually a business case involved in, whereby they had to justify the additional cost they would pay for using this new technology. It was as simple as that. They either accepted it or not then.
So there were, thanks a lot for sharing that story, because I know what we hear now over the next few video presentations is what it's like today in that regulatory space and some of the challenges that might be there and ways to overcome that. Thank you very much for your time and for coming live today. And we'll pick up again later on the panel discussion.
Thank you.
Super, thank you so much, and we'll see you both on the panel later on. So you can both turn your cameras on, and I'm now going to, your cameras off, sorry. And I'm now going to introduce our next speaker, Ravi Chana. Ravi has a degree in pharmacology and experience across a number of business areas. He has been part of working groups within NICE, NIHR, BIVDA, and ABHI, as well as undertaking projects for the UK Department of Health and UK DIT. A major area of focus within these projects was to assist health tech innovators connect with the appropriate experts in UK universities and the NHS. Ravi's role as Head of Business Development for Roche Diagnostics UK focuses on assessing innovative technologies and companies which could fit with the Roche Diagnostics portfolio or be potential partners for the UK affiliate to work with across patient care pathways. He also leads the value-based healthcare activities for Roche Diagnostics UK and Ireland, allowing him to work closely with the Roche Global Business Development Team to bring new innovations into the organisation. Thanks, Peter.
Hello, everyone. A big thank you to the team at Enterprise Ireland for hosting this webinar, and thanks to Len and Dermot for a great first session. My name is Ravi Chana. I'm Head of Business Development for Roche Diagnostics UK, and I'll be presenting on early technology development and how, through my experience of helping healthcare startups in the UK, I would advise companies to approach connecting to the right academic and clinical experts and also industry experts. Often, SMEs and startups are unaware of the various support services available to them. So in the next 7 minutes, I will cover who can help you make the right connections, what should you expect from connecting with relevant academic and clinical experts, and also how best to go about forming strategic alliances through R&D. This hopefully will give you an idea of how to accelerate your technology through R&D, but with an eye on commercialization. Firstly, and again through experience, I know it's important to focus on the end user and the customer and their needs. And the focus should not just be on the technology and the development of technology, but on who, how, and where the technology will be used. A question I would ask here is, am I or are we proactively thinking about clinical evidence generation to form our value proposition? And through the R&D phase, it's important to also investigate and address the following three things. Firstly, what are the current and future needs of the end user? And here we're talking about things like the NHS, whether it's the patients, the clinicians, or the NHS institutions, the NHS trusts. And as an example here, you could find some of these trends within documents like the NHS 10-year plan or other NHS strategy documents which are publicly available. And secondly, are you generating the right evidence? It's not just about validating the technology, but generating clinical and cost effectiveness evidence. And with the new regulatory standards, the MDR and IVDR that are now in place, it's even more important to have the right clinical evidence and cost effective evidence. And also it's about developing the use case. And I mentioned value proposition. Other colleagues will also give details about developing the value proposition later on. And this may sound far-fetched, and you may be thinking, why should I or why should we consider all these things at the early stage of technology development? Well, it's important to have the end in mind. And here, this is about who would use the technology, how they would use it, when they would use it, and more importantly, how they will reimburse the use of the technology. Again, there are support services available. And the first place to start here is the NIHR, the National Institute of Health Research. The NIHR is funded through the UK Department of Health and Social Care and is embedded within key universities and across the NHS in England. And more specifically, if your technology is at the early stage of development, this is technology readiness level 2 to 5, and you want to engage with key academics and clinicians in England, then the NIHR Office for Clinical Research Infrastructure, or NOCRI for short, is the place to start. Through their connections, you can sense check whether your technology actually meets a specific need and what you need to consider in terms of evidence generation. 𝐸𝐸 can also help connect companies to the medtech and in vitro diagnostic cooperatives, and there are 11 of these as stated on this slide. And their remit is really to help and work with companies to understand what the care pathways the technologies would fit into, understand the clinical utility and the evidence needed for implementing those technologies, and also the health economic evidence required. And they also work quite closely with some of the NHS trusts and the academic health science networks across England. If your technology is at a later stage of development, so technology readiness level 5 to 7, and you want to engage with companies like Roche, for example, and also with the wider network, then I would say probably the NIHR Clinical Research Network is a place to start. And here, what is available is something called a study support service. And if as a company you know you have a study synopsis or a protocol that you want to get implemented, the NIHR Clinical Research Network, through their study support service, will allow you to understand whether that study is feasible, is it deliverable within the NHS in England, and also who will help you deliver that study. And that service can offer some feedback within a matter of days. In 14 days, generally, they will say that they'll provide feedback. Both 𝐸𝐸 and the CRN study support service, free to industry. And my experience has been that companies that want to engage with the right academics and clinicians, if they were to do this on their own, it could take them several months. But the process can be shortened by working with 𝐸𝐸 and CRN. And another question you might be asking yourself is, again, all well and good that we have these services, but how can we access some funding programs? There are numerous grant funding programs ranging from basic research through to implementation and adoption. And this slide gives you an idea of some of them. And these funding programs are there to help develop not just the technologies, but also generate the evidence required for the adoption of technologies at a later stage. But how would you engage with these? Again, depending on the stage of your where your technology is at, it is important to investigate which funding program fits best. There is not enough time for me to go through all of these programs, but I will just cover a couple of which are very focused on medtech. The first one is the NIHR Invention for Innovation, I4I for short. This specific funding scheme is designed for industry, particularly SMEs, who have technologies in that early technology phase, so TRL 2 to 5. As with any funding programs, there is an application process, but there is a team within the NIHR who can help companies progress through the process and also handhold you through understanding what's needed to apply. Companies successful in attaining the NIHR I4I funding can also apply for follow-up funding. Another program which has been successful over the last 10 years is administered by Innovate UK. This is a UK government program which covers various sectors, including life sciences. And in recent years, there's a real focus on medtech and diagnostics, not least because there is a recognition by the UK government that this sector, medtech and diagnostics, plays a vital role in terms of economic benefits to the UK. My colleague Shamila will touch on some other funding programs later on as well. Now, Innovate UK works closely with the Department of Health and Social Care and the Office for Life Sciences, and they put out specific calls on a yearly annual basis. One specific call that was put out in 2019 was around the enabling integrated diagnostics for early diagnosis. And this received considerable interest from industry and academia. And as a result, 7 consortia were funded to run early development and evaluation studies, both based in innovative technologies. And Roche Diagnostics were part of some of these submissions. And we were fortunate enough to then work with 3 specific consortia which are highlighted here. And the first one being the Oxford DART program, which focuses on diagnosis of lung cancer. And here we're working with a UK SME called Optelum. The second one is the Manchester ID Liver project, which focuses on early diagnosis of liver disease. And here we're working with 2 SMEs, Perspectum and Jiva.ai. The third one is based out of the University of Belfast, the Action Project, which is looking at early diagnosis of colorectal cancer. And the SME involved here is Sunray Analytics. So you can see on here, through some collaborations that we have engaged in and some public funding that's been provided through, again, working with some of the universities, we've been able to set up some very good strategic partnerships. But why is this really significant? Well, the whole process of being part of a consortium is not straightforward. There are challenges in setting up collaboration agreements between the consortium members. But what the process allows you to do is work closely with partners in the consortium and thereby helping you form those strategic alliances and partnerships. So within the UK, Innovate UK projects, the SMEs have direct connections with companies like us, Roche Diagnostics, and their development teams. This should not be underestimated because it's important for a number of reasons. Firstly, it provides both Roche and the partner SMEs and smaller companies to engage and work with key academic and clinical stakeholders. It provides Roche Diagnostics global teams early sight of innovative technologies, and it also provides SMEs a chance to co-create and understand the requirements from a Roche Diagnostics perspective around innovation and commercialization. So just to summarize, there are support services available for industry and particularly SMEs who want to engage with key academic and clinical stakeholders. And this is in the form of the NIHR, as I've highlighted. There are funding programs available, but engage early in the development phase because these programs are not guaranteed to provide funding and they do take time to come through. Look for opportunities where you or the technology that you have can take part in consortia, looking to address particular healthcare needs, such as the Innovate UK calls I've highlighted. And this offers the opportunity to form strategic alliances with companies like Roche. And it is vital to build relationships and networks. And through these relationship networks, you can then engage with other opportunities that might fall out of those. Hopefully, I've provided and presented some food for thought. I'll be happy to take any questions during the Q&A. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that, Ravi. A huge amount of information there, and as you mentioned, obviously there's a lot of investment going into life sciences and in general here in the UK, but particularly around kind of medtech and diagnostics. I'd now like to introduce our next presentation on health economics by Ross McConaughey. Ross has recently moved on to a new role at MSD and unable to join the panel today, but if you do have any questions in that area, please do continue to enter those into the chat and they will be covered off by the panel. Over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Thanks very much to the previous speakers for that interesting presentation. I'm going to talk to you now about some of the important considerations when trying to demonstrate the cost effectiveness of your technology. So why would you want to prepare a health economic evaluation? Well, principally because policymakers and payers are interested in value for money when commissioning or approving evidence-based interventions. NICE in the UK, for example, will only recommend interventions that they consider to be cost effective. And NICE recommendations are really important for market access, even outside the UK. And within the UK, under new medtech funding mandate arrangements, they can actually lead to mandatory funding for your technology. So by cost effectiveness, what we mean by the costs are all the costs from the payer's perspective. So in the UK, that's the NHS and post-personal social services. By effectiveness, we mean the outcomes of interest for the individuals who are receiving the intervention. These are typically measured in QALYs, quality adjusted life years, because they are enable a consistent decision between disease areas. The NICE Diagnostics assessment program, for example, uses QALYs, but the NICE Medical Technologies program doesn't, only taking a cost consequences approach. But if you want to apply to that program, you have to demonstrate that your technology is either cost saving or cost neutral. It's important to emphasize here that cost-effective technologies can be cost increasing. So when NICE assess a technology in a clinical guideline, in the diagnostics assessment program, or via a technology appraisal, they're happy to approve any technology as cost effective that can generate one additional QALY for up to £20,000 of additional cost. Put simply, cost effectiveness is the difference in costs between two interventions divided by the difference in health benefits outcomes. So how do you demonstrate cost effectiveness? Well, if you've got a high quality long-term clinical trial, you can simply record all of the costs and outcomes and divide the difference in cost by the difference in outcomes. But quite often you won't have all of the evidence of interest, and you may only have, say, some short-term data, in which case you may need to rely on a decision analytic model. So a model is a mathematical structure that will combine all of the evidence of interest, so the patient's underlying epidemiology of their disease, the tests or interventions that they receive and the effectiveness of those, along with the resources that they utilize along the way and the cost of those resources. The costs, total costs of all of the patients moving through the model, typically for their whole lifetime, and their total outcomes will be added up for each intervention. The difference in costs is then divided by the difference in benefits to get your cost effectiveness. So it's quite common that models use this linked evidence approach to extend the outcomes from trials. And this is really common in diagnostics, but it requires more assumptions and more clinical buy-in to the links that you're going to propose between different pieces of evidence. So what I mean by this, by way of example in diagnostics, is that we often have diagnostic test accuracy evidence, but then we propose a way in which the outcomes of those tests link to a treatment decision. We propose a way in which the treatment decision links to a treatment effect, and we propose the way that the treatment effects link to outcomes. Now, this approach is only acceptable really if those links are obvious, well known, and not up for too much debate. However, even if your links between your chain of evidence are fairly weak or open to debate, going through the modelling process can be really helpful, because the structured way of thinking about things in terms of modelling what would happen to patients receiving your intervention can be really helpful to inform your market access strategy or your evidence generation strategy. When preparing a model, you need to pay a lot of attention to the PICO. And what I mean by this is ensuring the population in your evidence matches exactly the population who would receive the intervention in clinical practice, and they're not earlier or later in the diagnostic or disease pathway, for example, or a member of a different definable subgroup. You need to include all of the interventions and comparators of interest, paying particular attention to include something that represents the current standard of care. And you need to include all of the outcomes of interest. Avoid cherry-picking data by ideally identifying your relevant evidence via systematic literature review. So I'm going to give you an example of the modelling process with a diagnostic test. Now, suppose we have this new test that we want to introduce, and it has a high sensitivity and low specificity. So our value proposition is that it detects more people, but it will rule some more people in. Now, we know that the sensitivity and specificity of clinical decision alone is 80% and 75%, say. And the sensitivity and specificity of our new Wonder test is 95% and 50%. And we know the prevalence of the disease. So what we're interested in doing now is combining these data to figure out what would happen, how many people actually benefit from the test. So we start with this kind of decision tree. We have 1,000 patients in each arm, and we split them into the people with the disease and the people without the disease by the prevalence. This is the truth about their disease status, and therefore is common to both arms of the model. We're then going to apply the sensitivity of the test to those with the disease and the specificity of the test to those without. Notice how Wonder test identifies 75 more true positives, but at the expense of identifying an extra 125 false positives. Now, we've done 1,000 tests in order to get this outcome. So the long-term model has to answer the question, is it worth it? Is it worth doing 1,000 tests and identifying an extra 125 false positives in order to get the benefit of an extra 75 true positives? So what we would do is model the average long-term outcomes for all of our 4 groups based on epidemiology, treatment effects, and so on. We'd multiply the number in each group by the average resource use and outcomes and sum them up for each of our strategies. The difference in cost between standard care and wonder test is divided by the difference in total benefits to obtain the cost effectiveness. Now, it's really important to emphasize that sensitivity and scenario analysis are key. And there will always be weaknesses in your evidence base, but if you vary the parameters in your model to plausible other values and it doesn't change the conclusions of the model that your intervention is cost effective, then actually not having that evidence doesn't really matter, because if you collected it, it wouldn't affect the decision. Conversely, if the model is sensitive to certain parameters, it's also helpful because it shows you exactly where more evidence is needed. So my top 5 key takeaways then are: use all of the available data and compare your product incrementally, paying special attention to consider the PICO. If you have limited clinical effectiveness data, it means that you need a model. A model can help you understand the gaps in your evidence as well as calculate the cost effectiveness of your technology. The linked evidence approach is only acceptable to decision makers if the links are obvious and well known. And once you've done your model, sensitivity analysis is really important. Thanks very much for your attention, and I'll hand you over to the market access team now to talk about their part of the process.
Another fantastic presentation, and now I will hand to our next presenter, which is Shamila Afzal. After graduating with a degree in biomedical science, Shamila spent a number of years working in an NHS pathology lab as a state-registered biomedical scientist. Following this, she spent the last 13 years working in the life sciences industry in a variety of roles covering disease areas including hematological cancers, autoimmune-related disorders, and women's health. Shamila has worked for Roche Diagnostics for just over 5 years and is currently the market access manager in the UK, covering the cardiac and critical care disease area, where she's leading on the development of market access strategies for novel indications of biomarkers and on increasing patient access for more established biomarkers. Thanks, Peter.
So thank you very much, Ross, for your excellent presentation. And I'm going to share some key insights from the market access team that I hope you find useful to support the commercialization of your innovation. So entering the NHS market with an innovation is challenging. So developing a clear value proposition that helps tell a compelling story is important. It should include credible claims and value messages that resonate with different stakeholders such as healthcare professionals, payers, and patients. It should include information about the problem that your innovation is addressing, the consequences of not using the innovation, and the clinical and economical beneficial impact. We like to test our value propositions early to identify barriers and develop a strategy on how to manage and mitigate any risks. We may also uncover gaps around the evidence base. And the way we do this is to select and work closely with national or regional key opinion leaders who may be publishing and have interests in the field that we're working in. So we might have one-to-one interviews and conduct some research. We also organise advisory boards, which can include a wider group of stakeholders, such as from pathology to payers and patient organisations. And these activities will really give you that insight to the needs of each stakeholder. It's also important to think about understanding the patient journey to really build that strategy and understand that current standard of care and where those unmet needs are. It can help you position at which points the intervention should be used for which patients and in which setting as well. Having that holistic understanding will help you identify areas along the whole pathway that potentially could benefit from your innovation. And the way we do this is we will look at NICE guidelines, for example, and local guidelines and recommendations into the current standard of care. We work with local clinicians that care for patients. And this work also helps our HECON colleagues to map the costs of the current standard of care and also the proposed new pathway. Mapping the patient journey will identify key touch points patients have with stakeholders and healthcare professionals, and that will really help you identify who you potentially need to talk to, who you need to influence, and really build those relationships with. So on the next slide, I want to talk about understanding that NHS environment and understanding the money flow, because it will help you understand who are the budget holders. So Integrated Care Systems, or ICS, is a new structure that's currently being formed in NHS England, and that will help deliver the NHS long-term plan. And the new ICSs will effectively be the budget holders and have a single budget to manage and deliver care. So it's really important to understand each ICS priorities and how budget will be allocated, and there will be 42 ICSs once they've been formed. So they will have different priorities based on their local need and population, and in due course they'll be publishing their plans. So it'd be really useful to select an ICS to talk to that first matches your priorities and is really looking to achieve the same objectives that you can deliver and your solution can support, and really have those meaningful conversations. And think about how your solution can meet their needs and solves their problems, particularly catching up with the COVID-19 backlog at this stage. Think about using data sources that really show that local burden and how you can develop the case for change. And I will provide some links of databases that you can access as well. So a key question that get asked is who can I find to talk to in an ICS, as you may not have any connections. And I think a key area would be to start with a clinical champion who can connect you into the system and potentially be your sponsor. So start developing a network and really working closely with your clinical champion to build that network and start making inroads and bringing together different stakeholders to start discussing how your innovation will benefit and support the system. On the next slide, I want to give you an overview of the organisations who influence the NHS and actually also provide support to innovators as well. And one of these organisations is called the NHS Accelerated Access Collaborative, or the AAC. Now, the AAC provide a front door for innovators, and there will be an online one-stop shop where innovators can find information and support to nurture their idea from a research stage to testing to adoption and to spread. And this online portal is due to go live this summer, and it will be free to innovators, but they may signpost you to one of their partners depending on what support you need. And depending on who you're directed to, there may be a chargeable service. So I've displayed some of these partners here on this slide. So partners of the AAC can include NIHR, which offers industry support from an early concept stage, to also the MHRA, which offers guidance on regulatory requirements as well. Now, the AHSN network, the Academic Health Sciences Network, are a really useful resource to work with. And they offer support to SMEs. So they may guide you on what sort of evaluations you might need to consider and conduct, how to be NHS ready. They may help you with your business case development, highlight what system barriers you might face. They can signpost you, highlight areas of risk, and offer advice on regulatory requirements. And some of the HSNs I'm aware of actually offer free workshops. One particular HSN has like a market insight innovation surgery for 1 hour, which is free of charge, where they review your value proposition and your budget impact model as well. And I will provide links in my last slide. We have worked very closely with the AAC over the past couple of years. We applied to 2 programs in the AAC, which we won, and it's really supported the uptake of 2 of our innovations. So maybe in the Q&A we can share a bit more about that. And finally, I just want to talk to you about grant opportunities that you can apply for that support with research and development and commercialization. A good place to look at and start researching is the UK Research and Innovation website, which brings together 9 different organisations that connect research communities, institutions, businesses and the wider society in the UK and actually around the world. And some of these programs that you can explore include the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund and Horizon 2020 as well. And these grant opportunities connect you to key opinion leaders, clinical advocates, and commercial and academic partners like the NIHR and SBRI. So some advice when thinking about applying for a bid: check the eligibility criteria, because some of these bids and grant funding are only open to UK registered businesses. Some competitions might require a consortium to bid, so think about who you could work with, who the right partners would be that would be committed to the activity, who would act as a project lead, and allow plenty of time to submit the bid. And if you do win, think about, well, prior to the win, think about how you'd support that win and what the implications would be and how to be ready for that win as well. So on my last slide, the market access team worked very closely with different parts of the business, medical affairs, public affairs, to really drive and implement that strategy. We work closely on areas such as thinking about the patient pathway and understanding the current standard of care, developing that value proposition with that good evidence base, networking, bringing together a wide group of stakeholders to really support and drive our innovations. And finally, here are the links that I mentioned throughout my presentation. And thank you very much for listening, and I hope you found the information useful. Thank you.
Okay, so I do appreciate we're covering quite a lot of information today, and Shamila referred to quite a number of resources and links in her presentations. So just to let you know that all of the slides for today's webinars are available, and you can download them if you go to the menu tab under handouts. So I'd like to go to our next presentation on value proposition. Please welcome Christian Coors, Director of Startup Partnerships at Roche. Christian is a biochemist with a PhD from the German Cancer Research Center in Heidelberg. He joined Roche Diagnostics in 2003 and held numerous positions in procurement before becoming head of global brand management and later on international marketing leader at Roche Applied Science. In 2017, Christian co-established Roche's digital health accelerator, 𝐂𝐸𝐬𝐬𝐿, in Munich, and in 2019 officially became part of its management team. Over to you again, Peter. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Christian, and I'm part of the management team at Startup 𝐂𝐸𝐬𝐬𝐿, Roche's digital health accelerator located in Munich. It's my pleasure to present here today at the Enterprise Ireland UK event, and I would like to talk about how to create a strong value proposition for successful commercialization at scale and give you some advice on collaborations with corporates. So what do we do? Our slogan is transforming healthcare together. So we believe that startups actually play a crucial role in the digitalization of the healthcare industry. We believe that new digital technologies and business opportunities are additional to the Roche expertise. And that's why we, in 2018, established, together with our partners from Plug and Play startup 𝐸𝐴𝐵, which now became one of the largest hubs for digital health innovation in Europe. We have a strong focus on co-creation with a main goal to facilitate future collaborations after the acceleration phase. Just to give you a couple of focus areas, so we concentrated on digital biomarkers, disease management, clinical decision support, and many more. We are having 2 batches per year. That means twice per year, we are asking our businesses and other parts like R&D or medical, what are the biggest unmet needs? What are the biggest clinical unmet needs? And based on these focus areas, on these challenges, we are looking for the best startups in the world, which means we don't have a regular application process, but we base it on that focus topic. Then we are conducting with the selected startup and the acceleration. That means we have a tangible pilot we are working on where we are co-creating and working towards a solution. But we also have the classical characteristics of an accelerator, including coaching, mentoring, and matchmaking, but also internal and external networking for making the project and the startup visible. As I said, the goal is the follow-up. It's the joint development, it's the implementation and augmentation. And so far, we are doing quite good with an ongoing collaborations with at least 50% of the startups we accelerated. So let me talk about value proposition for successful commercialization and scale. So the major thing is always the money. It's all about the money. And if you think about the money, you also need to think, okay, who are the users and who are the buyers? So who are the main users who will pay for the product and why are they going to pay for it? So the user is often not the payer. There's all kind of models, B2B, B2C, B2B2C. There's all kind of buyers. There's user buyers, which are the patients. There's technical buyers, which is procurement. There's the economic buyers, who are the budget owners. For example, patients are often reluctant to pay, but many institutions might be interested in the patient data, for example, a corporate data. So need to think about what added value do you need to deliver in order to get them to pay. So think of the benefit for all the kind of buyers, such as a corporate, not only the patients, and have a clear vision on how the product and the revenue will look like. What are the benefits of the product? As I said in the beginning, it's always the unmet need, which is the guiding principle. So what are the real problems the user is facing? How do you engage the customer? And you can do this by achieving a high interaction rate with a large number of users in order to prove that concept and to prove the value of your solution. Think about scalability, where to play. So revenue models which work locally might not work elsewhere. So it's difficult to translate it to other markets. So it's important to build a scalable business from the very beginning and think about these questions from the very beginning. Then you need to create a connection between this user-centered agile software development and the evidence of medical benefits. Clinical evidence, medical evidence is really key. It's possible that you are required to really conduct extensive research and publish it because that supports your value proposition. This is also what we as a corporate partner ask for. We ask for these kind of clinical evidence, information, and data. Then also think about where do I face regulations, restrictions. So sometimes you want to ask, well, you want to approach patients. So you need to sometimes have the approval of the hospital management in order to talk to them, or the ethics committee approval in order to talk to them. Then regulatory. Don't think that you don't have to worry about regulations because you're developing a software and not a medical device. Because software that is intended to provide information that is used to make decisions for diagnostics or other therapeutic purposes belong to the class 2A of ISO 13485, which is the EU regulation. So if founders would like to offer the user a real health benefit with their solution, they need to think about, do I need a quality management for that? And you need to implement it at a very early stage in order to save unnecessary follow-up costs. So clinical evidence is also big key, and never underestimate any kind of strict regulatory environment. Okay, so basically, as I said, transforming healthcare together, what we like to do, or what we feel is helpful, is to create many perspectives, many different ideas, and put them all together. So you as a founder also need to understand this kind of complexity. You also need to understand the everyday life in clinics or talk to patients. And you need, if that all of that is obviously not available, you can also go ahead and just sell your lack of industry experience as an opportunity and ask for help. So it could be an alternative, not to just hire the key expertise, but to partner with a corporate as an alternative option. Which brings me to my last point: how do you work with corporates? As everywhere, a proper expectation management is always key. So stay realistic and transparent. Breaking up the silos in a corporate might take some time, so think of that as well. Adopt a more consultative approach. Imagine that more as a continuous process to achieve your ambitious goal. Apply agile ways of working, like have regular checks on reality and economic necessity. Think big, but start small. That means set goals and metrics, short-term and long-term. And then we believe that this, absolutely adds value to patient and enhances the innovation by putting the two parties together. With having that said, I would like to thank you for your attention and enjoy the rest of the event. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Christian, and we look forward to hearing from you on the panel. Now, our final presentation before we do go to the panel Q&A is from John Glynn. John graduated in biomedical science from Ulster University. He also has a master's in clinical chemistry as well as an MBA. After initially training at Antrim Hospital and later qualifying as a senior biomedical scientist, he then switched to industry. He has worked for Roche for almost 17 years, holding roles across regulatory, technical support, sales and market access in the UK and Ireland, and now as Healthcare Development Manager in Ireland. John's current focus is on shaping healthcare using innovative diagnostic and digital solutions, and he has a particular interest in clinical areas such as cardiology, dementia, and women's health. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Hello, my name is John Glynn from Roche Diagnostics in Ireland, and in this session I'm going to take you through a little about where Roche are focusing and an example of where we've partnered in the past. So Roche as an organization is really split into two main parts, and one of those being the diagnostics part, which we're going to focus on today, but also, as you'll all be familiar with, we have a pharmaceutical division as well, and the two operate quite separately, but then with much collaboration around areas of common interest like companion diagnostics. And if we focus into diagnostics, there's a number of different elements to diagnostics. So a very large part of the business is the core lab solution. So these are central biochemistry, blood sciences type solutions. Point of care, as the name says, solutions that you use by the bedside. Molecular solutions, so of course a key element in the fight against COVID. Sequencing, big in oncology, but also in infectious disease. Tissue-based solutions, again, quite a large oncology focus there. Diabetes management, so that's our diabetes care business, with patient meters and insulin pumps and associated software. And then finally, something I'll talk about again in a moment is decision support. So if we take those kind of different business areas, as you might call them, and look at how the strategy for that group together works, you would see three different areas really. And the one on the left, Diagnostic Solutions, is kind of our traditional business. So this is delivering medical value with diagnostic solutions, so essentially tests in reality. And where those tests then feed into is over on the right hand side here is disease management. And what we're trying to do really here is to focus on using those diagnostics and or therapies to improve patient lives. And it's really about trying to change the patient journey to be better than it is right now. And as I mentioned a moment ago, I said I focus on decision support. And what we really mean by that term, I think, is about using data and digitalization to improve patient care. And this is a key area where we focused, and is definitely an area where we're collaborating with SMEs and others a lot in this space. And the whole idea behind focusing here is about enabling confident healthcare decisions. So just for a moment, I'm going to focus a little internally before I turn the external focus on. And the pandemic, of course, has touched everyone, and it has really caused, I suppose, a focus within our organization because of where we are in providing diagnostics on trying to fight the pandemic. And how we've done that is by developing a portfolio of tests to use in the fight against COVID, and that's some 13 tests in about 12 months. And that's of course taken a lot of internal collaboration and internal focus to make that kind of thing happen, but not exclusively. And as I'll work on in the next few slides, is to really say that we're spending a lot of time collaborating with external partners as well, and this is a real key element for our future. So the example I'm going to use is a biomarker called NT-proBNP, which is used for patients who have heart failure. And why did that particular marker get chosen for collaboration? Well, it was a really good fit for us at Roche. We had a long history in cardiac solutions, and this was a marker that worked across the patient journey. So not just one element of heart failure care, but across different parts of the patient journey. And the partner in question here was a company called Medinova, later called Invent2. And they were an organization where we found a real kind of complementary fit. And you can see what that was really with the bottom 2 points on each side. And this was a shared collaboration and innovation culture. And what that really helped to do is to build the trust between the two organizations. And of course, in a collaboration like this, the different elements bring different strengths and skills. And with Medinova, they'd made a discovery, they had strong patents to protect that discovery, they were generating evidence, so they had a research network, and they were close to the clinic for that reason as well. But Roche are coming with something really quite different. They're coming with a global presence, obviously, proven high quality technology in the diagnostics field, where of course we had lots of expertise. So it was a good fit to try and take this discovery into a real world diagnostic product. And this timeline is maybe a little shorter. If the slide was longer, I could show a bit more, but really starting in 2003, when the first testing product was launched into the market, there's been a development cycle all through, and that continues today. So the different things you can see on this slide is different iterations of the test, increases in the intended uses. So that's what can you use the test for. We increased those as time went on, and how that's really delivered is by studies. By and large, that's how we get the evidence to increase the intended uses. And so a number of studies there, and the one at the top there, Pontiac 1, the successor to that, led to a claim extension in this year in 2021. But also there is an additional focus really on medical education and scientific symposia to really get the word out to clinicians and scientists about the availability of this new test. And in the intervening period since 2003, there's been significant amounts of evidence to prove the value of the test. So, thousands of publications around the biomarker, endorsement in different guidelines, And also even things like health economic data that can demonstrate the savings that could be made by using this test instead of standard care. And really, it all culminated, I suppose, for the story I'm telling here in 2016, when in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, this editorial by McKee and Burnett stated that NT-proBNP was the gold standard biomarker in heart failure. So in a kind of 15 years or so of the collaboration, this has gone from discovery to gold standard. So I don't have a lot of time today. So just to wrap up, really, to say that Roche are keen to explore partnerships to drive innovation with SMEs who have complementary solutions and interests. But I would say that even if you feel that maybe your solution isn't complementary, but you think that you'd like to tell us about it, I think by all means reach out and let's talk. I think it's important to realize that it can take time for solutions to come to market, and perhaps more importantly, it can take time for those new solutions to make their full impact. So, you know, it might not be 5 or 10 years, as in my example, it might be slightly more, but, you know, the impact will be made in time. Companies like Roche have the resources and capabilities to take innovative ideas and solutions and help you realize their potential in the real world. So yeah, absolutely do reach out to us. Let's talk and understand the solutions and the discoveries that you've made. So thanks very much for listening. I think I'm the last one in this session. So it'll be Q&A next, and I'm happy to take any questions then. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John. And you mentioned reaching out. So I think there have been a number of questions actually for you. So I know you're not on the panel today, but I believe you're amongst the attendees. So technology permitting, we will attempt to unmute you if we reach a question for you. Now I might just invite Jared, if you can turn your camera back on again and join me. Along with our speakers, Len, Dermot, Ravi, and Christian. Shamila isn't able to join us for the panel today, so instead I'm delighted to welcome and introduce her colleague in market access, 𝐂𝐸𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬 roles in diagnostics and pharmaceutical companies concentrating on women's health for over 20 years. She has been with Roche for over 5 years, currently as market access manager for women's health in the UK and Ireland. And as a member of the NHS England working group, Julia has led on the NHS England preeclampsia project, which was supported and funded via the AAC, which was mentioned several times earlier in presentations, rapid uptake products and innovation technology payment. You are very welcome, Julia. So Jared, I'm now going to hand across to you. And like earlier, when you see me again, that means you've got just 2 or 3 minutes left to wrap up. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Marie-Claire. Welcome back to the panel, and thank you. That was such an insightful set of presentations. And we hope that the members from Enterprise Ireland heard something new and valuable that can help you to be more successful when it comes to commercializing in the UK. And some of the themes that kind of stood out, I'm just looking at my notes here, were collaboration, networks and relationships. That also kind of came across very strong in your presentation as well, Dermot, just the number of people and relationships that you've built up in different countries throughout your career. The importance of partnerships, the need to engage with different stakeholders, unmet needs, the importance of evidence generation, but also lots of support that's available to you in the UK to help you launch and scale your innovations. And I love what Christian said about startups playing a crucial role in transforming healthcare. Now, we're going to do our best in the limited time to go through a number of questions. Any questions that we're not able to answer, we will get back to you in the next 2 weeks with answers to your questions. But let me start with Dermot. So Dermot, based upon your experience in commercializing an IVD test, what are the critical success factors you would advise a SME to consider?
Yeah, I think you touched on them there. Really, I suppose you really, first of all, you have to have knowledge of the market. You have to actually know people from within the market so that you can conduct proper research. So market knowledge is kind of number one before you can find out what the unmet need is. I suppose the second thing we found really helpful was that we hired people from within the market. So hiring medical scientists, we have this saying, if you have a medical scientist designing something for a medical scientist, you're going to get a better outcome than having somebody with a life science background. So that sort of thing, a lot of it is cop on. The relationships is huge, as you said, and I suppose the people are crucial. People are the lifeblood of any company, and you probably need to hire well and pay well. And I suppose the last thing I'd kind of throw in there maybe is honesty, care for the customer, and luck and good fortune is a big part of our journey. And finally, the last thing might be focus. Just you need to focus with the task in hand and not lose sight of it. And we focused on one particular market to build our reputation. So it kind of worked for us. That's from an SME point of view.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Dermot. And this one's for Ravi. So we've heard a lot about IVDs and diagnostic tests today. But what are your thoughts on new business models such as value-based healthcare? Is that something that's real and impacting the UK? What are your thoughts on that, Ravi?
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, with new business models, particularly like value-based healthcare, there's a real push, I think, and a pull as well within the healthcare system to look at these new ways of procuring technologies, because we know that any new technology coming to market will need sufficient evidence and clinical evidence and stuff, and by that there's a lot of investment that goes in. But when we're getting the evidence, I think I touched on this, is that what the whole point is, we're showing value to the system. And what we are seeing within the healthcare system in England, in Wales, in Scotland, is that there is a pull now saying we need to look at different business models, because the current system as it is and the budgets available aren't sustainable over time. So what we need to do is look at new business models where we are actually sharing risk potentially between industry and between the healthcare system to enable new innovations to come in. So we are working, for example, in Wales, and Wales have a particular policy in place called Prudent Health, looking at value in procurement. And we're working on projects where we are actually getting these procurement processes aligned so that we are focusing on the value of the diagnostic that's being used. And that's, for me, is the way forward. It's not we will still have the run-of-the-mill commodity items which are going to be based on price, but the new innovations that are coming through will really be focused on new business models and how they can be procured.
Brilliant, thanks, Ravi. And I think that's really interesting, I think, for some of the companies who are on the call to not just consider the technology, but how can you overlay a business model on top of that. And given that value-based healthcare, I think you said in Wales, adoption is starting to take place. That's definitely something I think some of the Enterprise Ireland members should be considering. I want to just go to Julia. So welcome to the panel, Julia. And Shamila mentioned that the AAC helped you with the uptake of 2 innovations. Can you briefly tell us what one of those innovations was and how the AAC helped you to drive adoption of that innovation?
Of course. So one of them was the new blood test for predicting the onset of preeclampsia, or indeed ruling it out. And briefly, preeclampsia is a disease of pregnancy that has very uncertain symptoms. It shows up in about 10 to 12% of all pregnancies, but only about 2 to 3% of those pregnancies go on to develop full-blown preeclampsia. It's the second most common reason for poor outcomes for mum and baby. And this was the first test of its kind that enabled the healthcare professionals to send home women safely who weren't going to develop preeclampsia in the near future. And I would say the commitment was set very early on that each of the stakeholders would come together and work in partnership. And there were many stakeholders in the project, from NHS England, NICE, the Royal College of Midwives, industry, academic health science networks, and key opinion leaders. And initially our working group met very regularly, and this was really to clearly identify what the barriers to adoption were. And these were the barriers that sat outside of the pure funding for the product. We came up with tools and strategies to agree and agreed them on how to overcome these other barriers. For example, we created a pathway transformation fund, and that was a fund that helped with costs that are incurred when making a change over and above the purchase price of the product. Support statements from the Royal Colleges and patient charities, a comms plan from the working group, exemplar case studies, and systems for resolving any non-compliance with the project, or indeed conflict within or outside of the working group members. And I think what everyone needs to think about really at the very, very start, and I think Shamila mentioned this as well, is that acquiring funding is just the start of the work. The project naturally evolves. You should really know your value and your expertise. And it's a continuous learning project for everyone. For this particular program, we initially signed up thinking it was a 12-month program, but in 2021 it will be entering its 3rd year, and we expect to need to support it until at least the middle of next year. So we'll be well over the 3 years of a 12-month project.
Brilliant, thanks, Julia. And I think in answering it, you also kind of brought to life just the number of stakeholders involved. It's very kind of difficult to kind of go it alone nowadays, that you need a lot of different kind of parties kind of working together to drive innovation in the NHS. So thank you. Julia, there's another question for you, so I might come back to you in a second or two. So Christian,
okay.
So pretty much everything I read nowadays is about AI, and in fact, yesterday the NHS AI lab talked about a £32 million investment in AI. So I just wanted to ask you, it's a question about, did 𝐂𝐸osphere, or has 𝐂𝐸osphere taken on AI healthcare startups, and is that something that you see happening more and more in the future?
Well, no, thank you for the question, Gerard. Actually, I think AI was from the very beginning one of the major topics for, as a focus topics, as a starting point at a project at Startup 𝐂𝐸osphere. Mostly it was related to image-based, like image-based diagnostics, image-based solutions, which is actually not really our core business as Roche Diagnostics, me being more in the IVD space. Nevertheless, what we see is that there is like interesting combinations of AI, actually optimizing image-based in vitro diagnostic solutions, together with our in vitro diagnostic solutions. Just to give you an example, and I think John Glynn just mentioned NT-proBNP as one of our markers for example, for heart failure. So, for example, there is other, like image-based solutions, how to diagnose, for example, heart failure, and this is around heart ultrasound or echocardiograms. And we were working together with a company at that time called 𝐂𝐸𝐬𝐬𝐸𝐬𝐸, now it's called 𝐈𝐧𝐬𝐬𝐸, who actually built an AI solution to provide a better readout, and for example, most follow a faster readout of these echocardiograms to confirm heart failure faster, to distinguish different heart failure types. But the idea is actually to combine this with one of our biomarkers to have a new and more powerful solution in the future for the diagnostics and treatment for heart failure. So this is like a typical example how AI plays a role also for us. We always have, several AI topics, and either they go into this process optimization piece of it, like process optimization, lowering readmission rates, for example. That could be an idea, or it's on more holistic, it's on clinical decision support, because like being a software as a medical device, AI is still really a tricky one, since there is no general rules on how to get that approved by the notified bodies, for example. But it's always been, and it always be, I guess, a very important part of solutions which we will see in the CareerSphere and hopefully might implement over time.
Brilliant, thanks, Christian. So that's a bit of a green light and thumbs up for any Enterprise Ireland member startups and SMEs working in the area of healthcare and AI. I'm gonna, if we can, just, this is gonna feel like a bit of a game show going into the audience, but we do have John Glynn in the audience. And we just wanted to ask John a question. And Len, you might wanna chip in on this as well if you'd like to. So, John, you gave a nice example of the collaboration between Roche and Medanova and the importance of building a culture of trust. And I know you've been recently working with an Irish SME called Redicare. And are there just one or two examples of, you can give us of how, trust has been built, or some simple things that a SME or early stage startup can do to build trust with a large corporation? I probably should have waited to see John's picture come up on the screen before I asked the question. But John, are you able to hear us? If not, let's
maybe I can pick a bit of that up, Gerard. So I think the trust element is important, and I gave examples of the Innovate UK projects, and through some of the initial discussions, I think that was one of the key things. And when you set up these sort of projects, you've got to work on some kind of collaboration agreement, and through that you're having to set up things like NDAs and CDAs and things. But that just allows you to have those open discussions. So for me, one of the things would be that if we are having those discussions, let's set up the NDA, have those open discussions, have a frank discussion, conversation to see exactly where the companies are at and where the technology and the solutions are at. That allows us to then be a bit more frank in terms of where we want to be and where we want to go together. And it definitely is about the trust, but it's also about the honesty in which you get the responses from both sides.
Yeah, fantastic.
Jared, I've managed to unmute John.
I'm here.
What does John think of Ravi's answer?
I was too busy trying to unmute to really take in Ravi's answer, if I'm honest. But no, so I won't rehash your question, Jared, but I did take it in, and yeah, you're right. So I had the pleasure of working with Redicare, and Christian was involved with that process as well. What I would say to the question is really trust works both ways. So the answer I'm going to give you doesn't just apply to the startup, it applies to the other party as well. Right. And I really think that being open and honest with each other builds the trust, and I think it's important to be clear about what you can do and what you can't do, because it's not expected that a startup will be able to do everything. And I think Christian actually touched on this in his talk as well. So it just avoids misunderstandings if you're clear kind of, well, we can do that, but we don't have those skills. And perhaps even then, by identifying those gaps, we can help point people in the right direction or hook them up with other people that can help with that. So that's one thing. I'd also say sharing information and always keep talking and communicating, that really builds trust to my mind. And finally, I'd say, so keeping your promises is a great way of building the collaboration.
Brilliant, thanks, John. So my first question went to Dermot. My last question is going to go to Dermot. Dermot, what's next for Serosep?
Right now we're actually scaling our business. We manufactured also a COVID kit this year, and it was quite successful with the NHS and the UK and the HSE in Ireland. We have new assay coming in for the autumn. It's flu, RSV, COVID-19 tests combined, and big part of it is scaling the business, and we're investing further in research and development. We're doing some blue sky vision projects for a change now, and the IVDR is the big thing to complete this. That's the big pressure at the moment. So yeah, things are looking pretty good and busy ahead.
Brilliant. Well, good luck with that, Dermot, and thank you to the panel, and back over to you, Marie-Claire.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt. I think we had quite a number of other questions that came in, but we will try and follow up with everyone kind of within the next couple of weeks. So yeah, thank you so much to all of today's speakers. Also to the attendees, in addition to following up with any of the questions that weren't answered, I will be sending a survey out probably next week just to gather some feedback to really find out what areas, you know, were of use of interest, what would you like to see in future webinars from us. Just on screen there as well, just a final reminder, some of Enterprise Ireland key support's available to you. If you have any questions on these or any other questions on any of the topics that we covered today, please contact myself or my colleague Peter Wade, or follow up with your DA. And just finally, just to thank our colleagues in Ireland who have very much been part of this collaborative over the last number of months. So Peter, Selma, Anne and Maria. And finally, just a shout out for our digital health companies. Peter will be hosting our next UK healthcare webinar on June 28th, and that has a focus on social care. So watch out for that and make sure you register. And that just leaves me to thank you again and have a great weekend, everyone. And of course, may the best team win this evening. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.